Before we start, we're close to reaching our dream of 1,000 subscribers, so please subscribe to the channel and let's achieve this dream together. Imagine this. From the very first moment in The Lion King, Scar was the one who became king instead of Mufasa. That scene we all saw, Mufasa standing proudly on Pride Rock with all the animals cheering for him, erase it from your mind and replace it with Scar. Same scene, same rock, but the atmosphere is completely different. The sky isn't clear, the smile is gone, and the eyes are filled with mystery. The greeting is no longer full of excitement, and there's more whispering among the animals than applause and cheers. Here, we're not talking about Scar gaining the throne through treachery like in the film. No, we're talking about Scar becoming king from the very beginning. Maybe Mufasa died young, or was never born at all, or even gave up the throne for some reason. But in every case, the result is the same. Scar was the rightful king from day one. At that moment, the Pride Lands were witnessing the start of a new era. One no one knew would be glorious or disastrous. Scar, the lean lion who always saw himself as the smartest of them all and the most deserving of the throne, finally found himself in the place he had always dreamed of. But in his heart, there was none of the kindness or wisdom Mufasa had. In his heart was something else, a hunger for power, and a desire to prove he was better than anyone who came before him. From day one, Scar began changing the rules. Mufasa had protected the circle of life, making sure every animal got its share and that the ecological balance never collapsed. But Scar? He had no patience for any of that. He believed the quickest path to power was to ally with the strong, even if they were villains. And that's why he reached out to the hyenas from the very first day. The hyenas, who lived in the shadowy lands on the borders of the Pride Lands, suddenly found themselves welcomed among the lions, not just as guests, but as the king's official allies. Of course, this decision turned everything upside down. The giraffes, the gazelles, the birds all became uneasy, because they knew the hyenas well, an endless hunger, and any chance to hunt something they'd never pass up. Scar began using the hyenas as his personal army. The moment any animal raised its voice or objected, the hyenas made sure to silence them. This created a kind of collective fear, which at first prevented any rebellion, but that fear was boiling beneath the surface. As for Simba, in this scenario, his story would be completely different. If Simba were born, he would be in danger from the very first moment. Scar wasn't the type to share power, and he wouldn't like the idea of another rightful heir existing. He might accidentally get rid of him, or even send the hyenas on a mission from which they'd never return. And if Simba didn't exist, Scar would work to ensure no other lion could become a threat. But the real problem wasn't politics or threats. It was nature itself. Once the hyenas became part of the Pride Lands, resources began to dwindle. Hyenas eat a lot, and they don't care about the hunting laws lions respect. The grazing lands started to empty quickly, prey began to migrate, and the balance Mufasa had preserved started to collapse. The smaller animals began to wonder, could the new king fix this? Or was he the cause of it? And the answer became clearer day by day. Things were getting worse. But Scar believed the problem wasn't the hyenas or hunting. The problem was a lack of loyalty. So he decided to tighten his iron grip and put the entire Pride Lands under the watchful eyes of the hyenas. And so the question remains, in this scenario, who could have stopped Scar before things reached total ruin? And was there even anyone with the courage to face him, surrounded as he was by hyena armies on every side? Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. And the Pride Lands began to change before everyone's eyes. The sky was no longer as clear as it used to be. The green plains had turned into dry, dusty patches, and the sounds of animals that once filled the land began to fade away. The land that was once a symbol of balance had become a symbol of hunger and fear. Scar, instead of facing the truth, kept blaming others. Every problem that happened, he found someone to scapegoat. If the prey migrated, he'd say the gazelles were traitors and that the lions had to assert their dominance by force. If the rain was late, He'd say the animals weren't showing enough loyalty to their king, and in the midst of it all, the hyenas were the biggest winners. They now controlled areas they could never have dreamed of approaching before. They played the role of both police and occupying army at the same time. Anyone who objected disappeared. And any animal that tried to resist met a fate everyone knew too well. But even among the hyenas, cracks began to show. Shenzi, Bonsai, and Ed, the three leaders, started to see that Scar was draining their resources too. He was demanding more from them than they could manage, pushing them into conflicts with animals bigger and stronger than they were. The beginnings of rebellion weren't obvious, but they were there. And in that moment, the first glimmer of hope appeared. A group of young lions who had left the Pride Lands years ago heard about what was happening and began planning their return. They saw that if things stayed the way they were, the land would die, even if the animals survived. But they knew, facing Scar would not be an ordinary confrontation. Scar was not Mufasa. Mufasa ruled with justice, which meant a battle with him would be one of strength and honor. But Scar ruled with deceit, which meant a battle with him would be a game of wits and betrayal. Any attempt to challenge him would face traps, ambushes, and twisted schemes. At the same time, whispers began to spread among the animals about a secret alliance. An alliance between some lions, giraffes, and even some hyenas who had begun to despise Scar. The alliance wasn't large, but it was enough to plant fear in Scar's heart. For the first time since he took the throne, he began to feel that a real danger was closing in on him. But Scar didn't wait for the attack. He decided to strike first. He sent the hyenas to raid small villages, not for resources, but to terrify anyone who dared to raise their head. Fires began to ignite in different places, and the Pride Lands looked more like a battlefield than a kingdom. And in the middle of it all, eyes began to turn toward one lion. A young lion whose features carried a trace of Mufasa, but whose spirit held a deep, suppressed rage. This lion had never cared about the throne at first, but the injustice he saw made him decide he had to step in, and with the first confrontation between him and Scar, the real battle began. Dawn broke, and the air felt strange, an eerie stillness, as if the land itself was bracing for a battle unlike any it had ever seen. The young lion, who had become a symbol of hope for every creature in the Pride Lands, stood on a high ridge, his eyes fixed on the royal palace atop Pride Rock. Behind him stood rows of lions and animals who had chosen to join the alliance. Even some hyenas, who had grown weary under Scar's rule, stood among the ranks, though their faces were marked with doubt and fear of how the other animals would react. Scar knew they were coming. He stood at the edge of Pride Rock, and through the morning mist, a cold smile could be seen on his face. He didn't look afraid. On the contrary, he seemed to be enjoying himself. Beside him stood ranks of loyal hyenas, and on the ground before them lay carefully placed traps, pits covered with grass, rocks balanced on the brink of collapse, and narrow passages ready to seal shut on anyone who tried to enter. The battle began with a roar that shook the sky. The alliance charged forward, but the first line fell into the traps. Boulders came rolling down, and the mist was filled with cries and shouts. Scar watched from above, his voice echoing over the battlefield as he declared, "This is the fate of anyone who dares to challenge me." But the young lion wasn't foolish. He knew a direct attack would end in disaster, so he sent a small group of lions through a side path led by a rogue hyena who knew the secret routes around the rock. That group managed to slip in from behind, creating chaos among Scar's loyal hyenas. For the first time, Scar was caught off guard. His furious roar shook the ground, but he descended into the battle himself, knowing that if he lost control now, everything would collapse. The encounter between the young lion and Scar was legendary. Scar began with words, trying to break his opponent's confidence. "Who do you think you are? Just a cub who knows nothing about ruling except fairy tales." But the young lion replied calmly, "Maybe I've never seen ruling, but I've seen injustice, and I recognized it the moment I saw it in your eyes." Their clash was fierce, each blow shattering the stones beneath them, each roar sending birds flying from miles away. Scar was cunning, steering the fight toward the edge of the rock, the same place where he had once cast Mufasa down. It was clear he intended to repeat history, but then came the surprise. One of Scar's own hyenas suddenly leapt at him from behind, not to help the young lion, but to take revenge for the years of deceit he had endured. That attack distracted Scar for just a moment, but it was enough. The young lion seized the opportunity, shoving Scar hard and sending him sliding toward the edge. Scar clung to the rock with his claws, and rain began to fall suddenly, just like the day Mufasa died. An eye for an eye. But the young lion was not like Scar. He reached out his paw to Scar and said, "Choose, live and face justice, or die as you lived, alone." Scar, in his pride and arrogance, tried to pull the young lion down with him, but the ground beneath his claws gave way. He fell, and the rain washed away every trace of him as if he had never existed. The battle was over, and the mist began to clear. The alliance had won, and the hyenas who had stood against Scar were accepted, but under strict conditions. The Pride Lands slowly returned to life, and the rain cleansed the ground of every drop of blood. The young lion stood atop Pride Rock in the same place where Mufasa and Simba had stood before him. But in his eyes was a new understanding, a lesson learned from all that had happened. Ruling is not power. Ruling is responsibility. And any king who forgets that is destined to fall, no matter how strong he is.